Hello, Waterloo Region. You're listening to Meet the Candidate on CKMS-FM 102.7 Radio Waterloo. My name is Bob Jonkman. In this episode, we meet Mike Morrice, the Green Party candidate for Kitchener Centre. In Meet the Candidate, Radio Waterloo provides 25 minutes of free airtime to the Waterloo Region candidates running in the 2025 federal election. This is not an interview, but 25 minutes of unstructured time. Candidates could tell you about their party platform, the local Waterloo Region issues they'll be tackling, why they're running, or what they do outside of politics. Note that the views expressed are not necessarily those of Radio Waterloo Board of Directors, volunteers, sponsors, or advertisers. Now let's meet the candidate, Mike Morrice, who's accompanied by Mary Jane Patterson.
Well, thanks so much, Bob. Thanks for creating space for candidates to share in the midst of this election and for folks in our community to hear more about who's running to serve them as their federal MP. I'm really glad to be joined by a longtime friend, Mary Jane Patterson. MJ and I got to know each other when we were both leading environmental not-for-profits in our community. A number of years back, I was leading a nonprofit called Sustainable Waterloo Region, and MJ, you were leading REAP at the time. And we thought this would be a kind of a fun way to spend this time together and put some questions back and forth and help folks understand more about the work I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And so, MJ, thanks for being willing to do this.
I'm very glad to be here, Mike. And reflecting back on all the work we did together, I was, as you said, I was leading REAP Green Solutions. I'm retired now and enjoying this time to explore things like volunteering for your campaign. And I'm really glad to share this time and give you a chance to think about what do you want people to know as they're thinking about who to vote for here. So I'm going to start just by asking, what made you want to become a member of Parliament?
Yeah, I love hearing that question from folks because particularly when I do like talks in grade school classes, because I think a lot of the time some would expect that someone had been thinking of doing this their whole life. And in my case, that wasn't it at all. When I was starting Sustainable Waterloo Region, of course, I was concerned about the climate crisis. And over the 10 years following, it seemed to me like I just kept hearing about politicians say things and then not follow through on doing them. And in the work we were doing together, I continued to come up against the reality that so much of what is, the main issues in our community could be solved by federal policy, whether it's related to the housing crisis we're in, whether it's around mental health supports, or certainly around climate. The year I decided to run in 2018 was the same year that the federal government affirmed we were in a climate emergency one day, and 3 days later, they bought a pipeline that we wasted $34 billion on. And so I think it was that sense of these are the folks who are making the decisions that affect our lives every day, and a sense of, I guess, frustration that the promises weren't being kept, and a sense of possibility of doing it a different way, which is also why I chose to run as a Green. Knowing that Greens focus on working for their communities. Of course, that's the first decision to make, is what party to run with. I wasn't a member of a party already, but I wanted to make sure if I did this, I could do it in a way that stayed true to our community, to who I was, and to avoid all of that of the politics that had kind of rubbed me the wrong way over the years.
Well, I remember our conversation when you told me, because you have been a Green Party member of Parliament now for 4 years. But before that, when you were deciding to run, you asked a few of us, a few people that you know, what we thought about that. And I thought, excellent, and you should be a member of the Liberal Party so you could get in there and make some climate action happen. And you explained to me those reasons why you didn't want to do that, why you felt that you could be more effective as somebody who didn't have to vote with the party, somebody who could avoid that partisan politics. And I really feel like you've proven that over the last few years.
What did you think at the time?
Well, I thought, jeepers, what are you going to be able to do if you're not part of the ruling party? So I urged you to consider another party. But I see a difference now. I see what you were able to do by making connections with other parties I guess maybe in a non-threatening way if you're a Green Party member.
I have found that being a Green, it can be less threatening for some of my colleagues when I try to work with them. And it is a question, MJ, that I get often knocking on doors as well, is, okay, what can you really... It used to be, how can you actually get elected? And that I have been elected. Now the question shifts, okay, what is it you can get done? And so one of the things I like sharing with folks are some of those examples of, you know what, if you're doing it in a way where you're focused on the community and not on some cheap political shot, well, you know, when our community was left off the list of encampment funding last November, I was able to walk over to the minister, was Sean Fraser at the time. He and I had worked together over the years. In question period, I avoided calling him names and, you know, built a rapport with him. We also had been working on two-way all-day GO train service. But I was able to approach Sean and just say, like, what happened here? We've tripled the number of people living unsheltered in Waterloo Region. The federal government has money to provide supports for folks living unsheltered, and Waterloo Region isn't on the list. And then, of course, then a few months later, following a number of conversations and letters and all the rest, the next wave of funding came along and Waterloo Region was on the list. We got $5.4 million. That is going to help build and renovate the shelter at 84 Frederick. It wasn't my individual effort. It was a shared effort. And I think it's important. We don't need to pretend like elected people do it all by themselves and plant their flag in the issue. But I think that's the kind of thing where I look back and say, well, that's why I'm doing this. I want to bring funding to our community, or on the Canada Disability Benefit, where I heard and learned from, by knocking on doors, the number of people, 40% of those living in poverty are folks with disabilities. The Liberals had made a promise. They hadn't kept it, to provide a new federal benefit that was meant to lift people above the poverty line. When I got elected, I set to work, started with a petition, turned that into a letter amongst other MPs and said, listen, there's all these 18,000 people who signed this petition. I think your constituents probably care about reducing poverty, particularly for folks with disabilities. We got 79 or so folks to sign on, and that then helped push the government to introduce the bill, and then we actually got a bunch of amendments to improve the bill. And now, regardless of what happens in this election, that benefit will begin July 1st. It is insufficient. We can talk more about it, but it was the largest budget commitment of last year's budget. And I'm proud that as the MP for Kitchener Centre, you know, I was making sure I was at that table ensuring that folks with disabilities in our community were being heard, and it's going to help them and others across the country. How about you? I know, MJ, you've been, one of the things I appreciate about you and many folks in our community is you've been tracking it all pretty closely. When you've been looking at, you know, and assessing what I've been doing these last few years, what's your sense of what you saw me do or expected or didn't expect to happen?
Well, I saw right from the beginning how seriously you took this role and I saw you as somebody who was really focused. What can I do in this role? And I think of it as two components that has made you effective. One is really knowing your community. So I saw you come to me when I was at REAP, and we talked about, you said, what are the policies and the programs that we need to make our community more sustainable that are federal level? And you asked me what you could advocate for, and we talked about low-income energy efficiency, for example. What are the attributes of an effective program that could make a difference? So I saw that focus that you had, and I've seen it all the way through. Like, you've been such a proponent of this disability benefit. I feel it's like your flagship in a way, and I see the tenacity with which you pursue that. But it's interesting for me to hear how you do that without critiquing so much as connecting, and that's what I think is the other superpower of Mike Morrice, because you have gone to everybody, every organization. They know you, you know them, you know what their needs are, and that's how. And you've also gone to every doorstep, so that's how you know what those needs are.
But see, that's to me where our community is strongest, because I feel like as an elected person, I'm better at my job if I'm not saying I know it all, but I actually spoke to the expert who does. And that is either a person with lived experience, so we need this benefit because here is what folks with disabilities have told me, or we need funding for low-income energy retrofits because the person who's been doing this for so long, here's the research she has done, and then, hey, here's how we can pay for it. Turns out we're giving our $30 billion a year to the oil and gas industry at a time when they already made $66 billion last year. Maybe we could reallocate those funds and use it to improve public transit, and then reference the research that public transit experts at TriTag have done, for example, and help people to retrofit their homes the way you had told me years ago. But I also appreciate what you're saying, MJ. You've got to be focused, because there is just so much the federal government is involved in. And it did occur to me early on that as one MP, you've got to make some choices about where you can have the biggest impact for your community and pursue that kind of doggedly if you hope to try to build coalitions across 337 colleagues in 5 different parties and 2 different languages. There's no shortage of barriers to try to build up those coalitions. But it does come back to what you're actually hearing from people.
Yeah. What are you hearing? Like, you're out campaigning now in earnest, morning, afternoon, and evening. What are you hearing from people?
Well, first of all, I was always surprised and continue to be appreciative that people choose to talk.
Right.
Because when I first started doing this, I'm knocking on somebody's door. They're not expecting me. And you're talking about politics. And so I do try to make sure I'm at someone's front door, rather than the standard political question of, are you going to vote for me? I try to make sure that every time I start by asking, what's your name? Have we met before? Nice to see you. Thanks for answering the door. But what is it you care about? What do you want me to know? What is top of mind for you? So that I might have a better chance of knowing what you're about and being a good representative for you, regardless of whether you vote for me or not. So one, I do feel like I learn things every day. Yesterday, I was learning about medication for folks with diabetes. There's federal legislation on that, and I'm not a diabetic myself, and I was learning from somebody who was and their experience. More often than not, I hear from folks about the housing crisis. You can't go anywhere in this community and not have somebody share about rents going up, about the cost of housing going up, about maybe parents who are worried their kids can't continue to stay in this community, a nurse who says they can't afford the cost of housing, of course the overall cost of living.
Yeah.
All of it, our wages are not keeping up with grocery prices, with rents, with any of it. And all of that is made worse by this threat from the White House that is, we are the 4th most affected in the country.
Wow.
It's 23,000 jobs, heavy manufacturing base in our community. I've spoken with folks who work at Toyota who aren't sure if they're going to have a job in a few months' time. Seniors who are living on pensions and fixed incomes and have seen their funds depleted through all of this absurdity from the U.S. And so it has, and I have been making clear, we need to make sure this is not a time to take partisan shots.
Yes.
We got to stay strong as a country, united as a country, and in the months leading up to this election, and should I have the privilege of going back to continue serving our community, we need to make sure that Kitchener's interests are reflected in the national plan when it comes to how we're going to, allocate revenue from retaliatory tariffs. I want to make sure that that worker from Toyota is supported the way that folks in the pandemic were supported, or small businesses like Georgette Packaging, whose revenue significantly comes from the U.S. We got to help them to diversify. And low-income folks who can't afford the price of essentials to go up again when things were already harder than they've ever been. So it's rare to, be on a street and not have someone share with me how the threats of annexation and this tariff menace is affecting them. And I try to make sure in those conversations we recognize our common threat is not one another. It's not even the American people. It's the White House.
Right.
And truthfully, Greens are not going to be governing in the next election. And whoever is, though, I want to make sure that our interests and priorities are reflected, being so significantly affected.
Well, I think I hear strong motivation from you to be reelected and to see why. Or I think I'm hearing part of why. Like, you've had 4 years. Have you sometimes wanted to throw up your hands? Or
Oh, there's some days I get home and think I should have to have a shower. Like, this is some of the toxicity in Ottawa is so vitriolic, the partisanship. But again, to me, about going back, it's about bringing our concerns rather than being told, here's the slogan you're going to repeat tomorrow. And I've sat there and listened to it. Every MP from that party says the same thing, so they can each get their clip. And then it comes to the votes, and they each get a piece of paper that says, here's how you're going to vote. And they all vote the exact same way. Wow. Rather than, what I'm excited about is going back there to make sure, not that we all agree on everything, but it's so much easier to do this job when I don't have to lie to folks or pretend I believed in something I didn't. But that I can actually take what I'm hearing at doors and at events and across the community. And I think our community deserves to have a voice that reflects their priorities and concerns and is also accountable, that somebody can just get in touch. And maybe there might be a decision I make that might not reflect a particular person's interest. Well, let's talk about it. Let me learn from you. But I do think that accountability is what is important in our democracy, and that our community deserves that kind of accountability. Now, MJ, we were at doors yesterday. We were on different streets at the time, though. Right. And so you were knocking too, which I really appreciate. I'm not doing this by myself. We have hundreds of people helping, folks that have known me long since before I ran as an MP, who might not be there because they have a Green Party flag, but because they might want to make sure our community has someone like myself fighting. What did you hear yesterday? Were you surprised by anything? What do you want me to know from your door knocking yesterday?
Well, first, I definitely heard recognition of who you are, and that shows me, not from everybody, but if people knew any candidate in this riding, it was you.
Right.
So that shows me the connecting that you're doing, and that's really, I think it's pretty neat for people to at least know who a candidate is.
Yeah.
Often, they have never heard of the candidates that are running in their riding.
Yeah.
Now, you've been our MP, so that's part of it, but part of it is also that you're out there knocking on doors. I heard tariffs, for sure. People are worried about this.
Yeah.
People are scared.
Yeah.
That's part of it. I heard housing, but I've also heard the landlord perspective, so that's been interesting. It's a two-pronged story there to support people in our community. I think what's been interesting for me when I think about why do I want you back as a member of Parliament, I think one of the things that occurs to me as we're talking is that you may be a more effective advocate for bringing supports to our community because you are not from another party and there isn't that cross-party fighting or what. I guess it's just partisanship, but I think you may be a good neutral intervener on our behalf.
Well, one thing I have found is that being in a smaller party, I'm never being sent out to filibuster a committee, for example. I'm never being sent on a partisan mission of some kind. So I have found that helpful. Like when I speak with colleagues and they say, okay, I got to go to committee and filibuster this afternoon, I'm thinking I'm going to go to a committee and actually talk about housing and get some ideas put forward that could help make sure that we keep talking about the definition of affordable housing, the fact that the federal government currently sends money to build housing that folks in our community can't afford. I want to keep pushing Motion 170 that would change that definition and move tens of billions of dollars to build more affordable housing. I'd personally much rather do that than that kind of more partisan mission. And I do think that that is something that Elizabeth May has done over her time. So there's a bit of I remember when I first got into Parliament, somebody said to me, Mike, I see Greens as the conscience of this place. I think Elizabeth is known as somebody who's been focused on democracy above all and on issues above all. And so certainly when I take that approach, folks are not surprised. And by doing that, I think then you can build up that rapport that when I approach a minister, they might know that I'm not there to get a clip, that I'm actually there because there's an issue in my community. And you know what? A lot of these issues are not singularly Waterloo Region issues. when I started pointing out how we are dramatically underfunded for the arts, for example, turns out we're not the only one. Our per capita funding is a $9 million shortfall, even if we were just at the average of other communities across the country. And so then, again, rather than being sent on some partisan mission, I sought out MPs from all parties, that my team did the research and found they were also underfunded. And so let's do a joint letter together from all parties across MPs who are saying, well, hey, wait a second, the Canada Council for the Arts was recently cut. Maybe we should return it to its original levels. And if we do, let's lift up the communities. Let's not drag down those who are doing well, but let's lift up those who've been historically underfunded. And when, the NDP MP for Edmonton signed on, and a Bloc MP in Quebec, and a Conservative in Sarnia, well, what did we have in common? We were collectively in this same boat that our communities were getting underfunded. And I think they knew that I wasn't there to score a point for the Greens, but I was there to make sure in the following budget that this issue was going to be addressed. And I am proud that that joint letter ended up having folks from every opposition party who ended up signing on. And I want to go back and continue to do that work. The budget never ended up happening because Parliament got prorogued. That's what I'm excited to go back there and continue to do.
That's great. Well, I'm taking off a bit on that conscience piece, because I've seen that when I've brought to you, for example, a human rights issue on behalf of some friends of mine. I went repeatedly to other members of Parliament and couldn't get any response. Yeah. And I appreciate that you were willing to take that on and to use your friendships or your role to have a conversation that helped move that along.
I found actually, MJ, the time right before and right after question period to be the most constructive. Every minister, all of cabinet is just sitting there. And I can walk over with a letter from someone like yourself to say, this is an issue you can do something about. You're about to do this theatric thing for an hour. Let's actually get something done first and make the most of that connection with these folks who can address that issue. I'm seeing Bob just walk back in the room, which means we might have only a couple of minutes left. What do we want to close with, MJ?
Do you want to talk about why it's important for people to vote in this election?
Gosh, yeah. I love chatting with folks who share and are honest to say, maybe I haven't voted before. The largest voting bloc are folks who haven't voted before. And I think more than anything, it's that they deserve to have their concerns reflected. And even folks who say, hey, I'm not political, well, I bet you still go grocery shopping. I bet you probably pay rent or have a mortgage. Maybe you're waiting for a childcare spot. These are the decisions that will be affected by folks who are in this session of Parliament. And I try to leave with that person a respect for their decision, but a hope that they might make that connection between their vote and their quality of life, and that if they get out to vote, maybe we can continue to make sure our community is heard in that place where decisions are made about childcare spots, about grocery prices, about the cost of rent, about what our community is going to become, about two-way all-day GO train service to Toronto that was promised a decade ago. But I think we might have the Oscar music pretty soon. So MJ, thank you. Thank you, Bob. Thank you to CKMS for making sure there's space for these kinds of conversations.
You've been listening to Mike Morrice, the Green Party candidate for Kitchener Centre, and Mary Jane Patterson on Meet the Candidate. The views expressed were those of the candidate, not necessarily those of the Radio Waterloo Board of Directors, volunteers, sponsors, or advertisers. All Waterloo Region candidates were invited to meet the candidate, but some candidates have declined to appear on the radio and some have not responded at all. Remember, the election is on Monday, the 28th of April. Show notes, podcast, and video will be available shortly on the Radio Waterloo website at radiowaterloo.ca/MTC. The show is produced by me, Bob Jonkman, in the studios of CKMS-FM. The theme music is Falling Sky by Jason Shaw of Audionautics.com and used under Creative Commons Attribution Only International License.